It provides some lift, not a lot. That's why the shuttle descends so rapidly. But during this phase in flight, the shuttle is actually rolling and banking through the air to burn off energy. They do have elevines, they call them. They're the wing flaps on the bottom of each wing that move as you get down deeper in the atmosphere. Those are hydraulically powered. Obviously, a failure in the hydraulic system could be a factor. If the leading edge of that left wing, where we know some debris hit during launch from the insulation on the tank, caused any loss of integrity with the heat protection system of the orbiter, that could have started a failure. The last radio communications between the shuttle and mission control involved landing gear tire pressure. The landing gear, of course, are in each wing of the orbiter. It's hard to see on this model, but they have sensors on them that measure the pressure of tires, and a change in pressure, an unexpected change, could indicate something going on there. The one thing that my sources are unanimous on this morning, or this afternoon, is the focus right now is on the left wing, systems in the left wing that could have led to this failure. Again, not confirmed, but it is something they're looking at.
Well, Bill, one more time, and for those of you who've been with us all along, if an apology is necessary, I give it to you. But frequently, the first things you hear turn out to be wrong, or at the very minimum, not quite right.
No question.
What Bill has emphasized time and time again here, there's not a better reporter on the space beat than Bill. He is the premier reporter on this beat. His sources are telling him that in the very early stages, just the front edge of the investigation, that NASA's thinking about that left wing because they believe, confirmed, they believe that something happened on that left wing. What caused it? Was it something else on the spacecraft? At that point, we simply don't know. But Bill, with all that in mind, does this or does it not present itself as part of an ongoing piece? We mentioned earlier that after liftoff, some concern was expressed about a piece of insulation that when the fuel tanks necessary for launch separated from the spacecraft, there's some concern that a piece of insulation had possibly hit a wing. Was it the left wing?
It was, Dan. It was the left wing, and it really happened long before the tanks separated. The debris we're talking about came off about 1 minute and 20 seconds or so into flight. This is after it had gone beyond the speed of sound, but while it's still fairly low in the atmosphere, it's a subtle thing. It's hard to see, and we should not connect these two events. This could be coincidence. It could be the foam hit the left wing, and that had nothing at all to do with what happened today, but it's a big coincidence at this point. But we've got to stress that until they tell us what the telemetry showed, the data that's radioed down on where the wing flaps are positioned, the health of the hydraulic system, the landing gear tire pressure, all of those things that are involved with that left wing, until we find out some data there, I think it's really premature to try to make any connections here at all, other than to say they're looking at systems in the left wing as being a trigger or at least a participant in today's failure.
All right, that moves the story along to that extent. Whether it turns out to be important or not, that in the very early stages there's some concentration on the left wing of the space shuttle because there is a suspicion, please put the word underscored, a suspicion that as trouble developed on the space shuttle, something, whether it was the first something or not, something developed possibly, again mark the word possibly, on the left wing. On the telephone now from Minneapolis, Bruce Haviland, a cousin of Columbia astronaut Laurel Clark, Navy Commander Clark, also a medical doctor who was on her first flight. That Bruce Haviland was at the Cape to watch his cousin's launch, and we thank you for being with us, Mr. Haviland. And the first thing we want to do is express our condolences, our sympathies to you and your family. And
thank you very much for those kind words. If
you can tell us something about Commander Laurel Clark, obviously a tremendous and amazing woman, to be a medical doctor and then to become an astronaut.
When earlier I was listening to a person talk about being terrified when the space shuttle took off. Several years ago, I was on a camping trip with Laurel and her son and other family members, and we talked about the takeoff. And she shared that feeling. But she had that passion that he also talked about. She loved the NASA space program and was very excited about being in space. My wife and I have been getting up every day since she's been in space and turning on the TV and watching the live video, my heart goes out to all the family members. I met the father of the Israeli astronaut at the launch and had a very pleasant conversation with him. And we all felt that a collective sigh of relief as the launch was successful, never anticipating what has taken place.
We thank you for your time, for your insights, and for your hope with the memory of this brave astronaut, Commander Laurel Clark. And again, we extend our sympathies. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your kind words.
On the telephone now from Dayton, Ohio, Colonel Mark Brown, who flew this Columbia vehicle some years ago, the Columbia vehicle that was destroyed, plummeting from space today. Colonel Brown, thank you for being with us.
You're welcome, Dan. Thank you.
Can you give us your perspective on what's happened today?
Well, obviously, this is a tremendous tragedy, not only for the NASA family, but for the nation as well. And just like Challenger, it hits you at two levels. First is the loss of life, the loss of friends that impacts all of us. And secondly is the technical impact. You know, what was it that went wrong that resulted in such a horrible outcome? And as your previous guests have mentioned, there's going to be a tremendous amount of effort expended here in the very near term to understand exactly that chain of events that led up to this catastrophe.
Well, Colonel Brown, as you look at the video, I'm not sure you can see it at the moment, this amateur video, which thus far is the most graphic evidence we have of what happened to the spacecraft. There's anything in that video, you know, you have the speck of Columbia up there, and then sort of a brightness, and as that develops, has anything come to your mind about what could have, might have happened up there?
Yes, and in fact, as was pointed out by your previous guest, everything has to be labeled as speculation at this point. And we also have to remember that we're looking at video that is not in serial. It's from different camera perspectives, all being looked at, you know, at different times. So one of the things that NASA will be doing right now is the same thing that we're trying to do, is figure out what is the actual sequence of events that occurred. One of the things that caught my eye from one of the video is you can actually see a panel that separates and is floating down away from the orbiter in the jet stream. And the panel itself is white-colored instead of black-colored, which again talks to being from the top half of the orbiter instead of the bottom. If you continue to watch that sequence, then you notice that shortly thereafter there's a bright flash from what appears to be the aft portion of the orbiter. Now that suggests two things. First, for a panel, whether it's the elevon or something else, to depart from the vehicle, clearly that was a structural failure. The loss of hydraulic fluid, for example, to the elevon would not cause that. Something else caused that. The secondary effect then is with that panel missing and the vehicle essentially being exposed to an 1,800-degree environment at 7 times the speed of sound, all the systems that have now been uncovered are exposed to that thermal load. So the secondary thing we see, which is the bright flash, may actually be some of the subsystems detonating as a response to this exposure thermally. So like everybody else, we're going to have to watch this. There clearly are indications that it may be related to the left wing, but I think we can't say anything more definite than that at this time.
Colonel Brown, this is Russ Mitchell. I had a question for you. As someone who has flown the Columbia, describe to us what it's like on re-entry into the atmosphere.
Excellent question. And in fairness, I should say I was a mission specialist, even though I'm an Air Force fighter pilot. So I rode in the vehicle. The pilots up in front get a little testy when you claim that you actually flew the vehicle. Re-entry is totally different than ascent, where ascent is a very dynamic experience that goes on for 8.5 minutes with a lot of shaking and, you know, fire and that kind of stuff. The entry is very benign from a crew member standpoint. It starts typically over the Indian Ocean where the deorbit burn occurs, normally in darkness.
Colonel,